We have the latest on Tropical Storm Oscar. There's a lack of precip and a lack of cold for the continental United States. And we have the latest on La Nina for the upcoming winter next on the Weather Farm. Good evening on your October 21st, 2024. It's Monday. Here are your weather headlines. We have the latest on Tropical Storm Oscar as it moves its way away off of the Cuban coast. Most of the continental United States is going to have warm temperatures and low chances of precipitation for the upcoming week. And we take a look at the equatorial temperatures in the Pacific Ocean. Does that give us a La Nina pattern? What does it mean for our upcoming winter? We look at all the data in our latest La Nina forecast. But first, let's take a look at our weather hazards across the United States on this Monday evening. We have high wind warnings across parts of Kansas. We did see a lot around severe thunderstorms earlier today. That this will continue to see gusts up to 30, maybe 40 miles per hour through tomorrow morning. Parts of Colorado still have freeze warnings in effect for this coming evening. We also have a high wind advisory for parts of southeastern Wyoming. And looking up into the state of Washington, along that I-5 corridor down towards the Oregon border, we see freeze watches tonight where temperatures can drop as low as 32 degrees. Of course, down in Florida, we still have those localized creeks and riverbanks and the localized flooding concerns from Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton as they continue to recover from those storms. And speaking of the tropics, let's look at what's going on in the tropics. So we have Oscar here centered off the eastern coast of Cuba. It's continuing to spin. Latest observations have it, is the only named storm that's supposed to be developing over the next 7 days. It's something we'll continue to watch because if you remember, as Oscar made its way across the coast, it wasn't expected to develop. It actually had a 10% chance or less of development. We saw what happened. But as it moves north and east over the next 96 hours, it should remain a tropical storm as it moves towards the western side of Bermuda. It will mainly affect shipping vessels and things like that in the next 4 days. But here we are with our 4-panel chart. Here's the low pressure system. We see the greens. It's in a favorable environment for wind shear. But we see just to the west, we see a large area of dry air. Right now, Oscar's in some moist air that's helping to keep the system going. But we're going to watch this over the next 24 to 36 hours because as we see by tomorrow night, Tuesday night, into early Wednesday morning, Oscar's moved away from the coast of Cuba through the Bahamas, but now it's entering an area of unfavorable wind shear, and we see that dry air as it starts to move in and wrap counterclockwise around the system. We see that starting to work in. What does that mean for Oscar? Where is it going to go? Here's an idea of the different computer models we look at here at the Weather Farm each and every night. So again, as it moves through the Bahamas up towards Bermuda, pretty much in a northeasterly pattern, but by Thursday or Friday, it's up near the coast of Nova Scotia. And then it's out to the North Atlantic and becomes extratropical. But however, all the models are showing that through 96 hours, here's tomorrow night at this time, it's still a tropical storm. 48 hours, some models have it increasing in strength, even though it has that wind shear and it has the dry air wrapping in it. Remember, as it moved from Africa across the Atlantic into the Lesser Antilles, when we were talking on Thursday night, we thought this storm only had a 10% chance of development. And then Saturday rapidly intensified into a hurricane that had winds at 85 miles per hour. So this storm is a little tricky. We continue to analyze data each and every model run. But by the time it gets to Nova Scotia, 96 hours from now, most models, except one, has it as a tropical storm. There's one model that even wants to hint to bring this back to a hurricane status storm. That's something that we're going to have to really watch over the next 96 hours. But as it moves into the North Atlantic, it will rapidly become extratropical and lose those tropical characteristics by the weekend. Coming closer back to home, as I mentioned, we had parts of severe weather across parts of Kansas. We had funnel clouds and we had some hail and severe weather that moved through those areas today. Tonight focuses on Iowa, Missouri, and northeastern Kansas for about a 40% chance of some severe weather. Then on our Tuesday, we don't really have the energy, we don't really have the lift in the atmosphere. The Storm Protection Center has a very slight risk for both parts of Illinois, Missouri, and Iowa, and even the northern parts of Minnesota. And actually, this is going to be the best area for any kind of severe weather, as that low has tracked way north by this time tomorrow into Ontario. And so as that wraps around, this is where we're going to see the best chance of any kind of severe weather for our Tuesday. And then speaking of our weather, after we get through that tomorrow night, these are our low temperatures that are projected for Tuesday night into Wednesday. And the thing we notice is there is a lack of cold weather on this map. I mean, parts of southern Oklahoma may not get below 70 degrees on your Tuesday night. Even those areas in Washington that are under those freeze watches tonight, you'll be back in the 40, 45 degree range. Most of the eastern half of the United States, Saginaw, Michigan, you could not drop out of the 60s on your Tuesday night. That is above your normal average high for this time of the year. And the warmth continues all the way down through the Gulf and into parts of Texas as well. Very mild, very warm temperatures. All the cold is staying right to the north. Again, I mentioned that low pressure that's bringing the storms to the plains tonight. It rapidly moves up into Ontario and spins up to a very intense low just south of Hudson Bay. And it starts to wrap in a lot of that colder air that's stuck up in Northwest Territories and Nunavut in the Yukon. So we're going to see temperatures there 20, 30 degrees. But even for that, it's still above average for this time of year. And so we see this. Here's that system that's affecting the plains tonight and tomorrow. We see its energy gets transferred to a much stronger trough. That kind of makes its way into the eastern half of the United States. But then by Thursday and Friday, we have a very zonal flow across most of the United States. Until we look out west, we see a big trough beginning to build way north into Canada. I mean, this is probably going up into the Yukon. And then coming on shore early next week, another deep trough. This one we're going to watch a little bit. But as I mentioned, this huge trough, ridge that's going to build up into the Yukon, into the Northwest Territories, it appears at this point it's going to be strong enough that even though we're going to have that deep trough in the west, that ridge is not going to give up. So most of the eastern half of the United States is going to have an exceptionally warm Halloween and start to November. But again, that's 10 days away. The models can definitely change, so do check back here at the weather farm for that. So we look at the weather patterns again for tomorrow. As I mentioned, the best chance of severe weather is going to be up in the northern part of Minnesota into parts of the UP. Even into Ontario, we have a 994 millibar low that's projected to be there. Snow, as it wraps that colder air down, is going to accumulate in Manitoba and in Ontario. But for the rest of the United States, we don't really have any precipitation. Temperatures are going to soar into the upper 80s to low 90s across Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. We see 90s in the desert Southwest, whereas east of the Mississippi, we have temperatures that are going to approach 80s in places like Indianapolis, into Chicago, into upper 70s into lower Michigan. Much 20 to 25 degrees above normal for this time of the year. And then we look at our temperatures for our weather for our Wednesday. Again, most of the eastern half of the United States under the influence of high pressure. There may be a little unsettled weather in New York as that low continues to work its way through Canada. We have a little system dropping down into Montana, into Wyoming. It's not going to bring a lot of precipitation, doesn't have a lot to work with, so we'll continue to watch this. The one thing that we will notice in that part of the country is we will see a slight decrease in the temperatures for our Wednesday. So we're going to see highs in the 50s and 60s, but those 90s, they're suppressed just a little far south, but even Oklahoma City, you could be flirting at 95 degrees for your Wednesday. We see cooler weather across the northern Great Lakes. Temperatures that were once in the 70s and 80s on Monday and Tuesday are now going to be in the 50s and 60s. And that cooler air will spread to the northeast later in the week. Again, we look here at Thursday. Pretty quiet weather across the eastern half. A touch of rain again from Minnesota, but most of the western half of the United States, again, very calm weather. Not, as I mentioned in the opening, not a lot of chances for rain in this upcoming work week for most of the United States. And our temperatures for our Thursday are going to reflect that warmer pattern that we've been seeing for most of the month of October. Again, 90s will spread into Kansas, even into western Missouri, 92 for Oklahoma City. As I mentioned, the cooler temperatures are going to sag into the northeast. Parts of northern Maine may not get out of the 40s. We start to see a little bit of cooler weather into Montana, into the Rockies, where temperatures will be in the 30s and 40s, but generally a warm pattern for most of the United States. Speaking of snowfall over the next 7 days, we'll see a little bit, primarily tonight in parts of Alberta. You may see anywhere from 5 to 10 centimeters of snow. Here in the United States, in Idaho and the higher elevations of the Rockies, generally seeing 6 to 12 inches of snow for your Monday into your Tuesday morning. And again, rainfall across most of the United States is going to be very hit and miss. This particular model wants to give a little bit heavier chance in the Ohio Valley, with maybe precipitation totals up to 1/2 an inch. And that's primarily going to be Thursday night into Friday, and we'll talk about that later. And then, of course, the West Coast, where it's been very rainy and very snowy into British Columbia. Again, heavy amounts of precipitation are expected there for the next 7 days. So the updated outlook for the 14 days, which almost takes us to the first full week of November, shows across the eastern 2/3 of the United States above normal temperatures, the western 1/3 below normal temperatures. And our precipitation is a hit and miss thing. Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, parts of eastern Kansas, southern Iowa, you seem to be the bullseye for the best chance of having above normal precipitation. And I know that's one thing we've talked about here in Illinois, Iowa, and Nebraska. These are our 3 biggest corn-producing states in the United States. So hopefully, over the next 10 days to 14 days, a lot of the farmers there can get most of their corn crops in. I think the last report I saw last Thursday, in each of these states, about 33% of the corn crop had been harvested as of last Thursday. But across the plains, even into Illinois and Indiana, good weather to start our November. So I mentioned, let's take a look at what's going on with the equatorial sea surface temperatures there in the Western Pacific. And what we've seen is that compared to normal, temperatures have been running anywhere from 1/2 of 1 degree to 1 degree Celsius cooler than normal. The latest update as of today shows that that value is at 1.04 degrees centigrade lower than normal. We did see a similar pattern happen in mid to late September, so about a month ago, and then the pattern went back into an INSO-neutral position. So technically, with a value of less than 1, we're forecasting a La Nina pattern for this upcoming winter. And this is in line with what the prediction said, that we would have a 60% chance of having a La Nina winter. But we'll continue to watch these numbers to see if they do tick back up or if they stay below that 1 line. And just a reminder, La Nina means that we have wet and cool jet stream. We have cooler than normal temperatures in the Gulf of Alaska. The polar jet is way to the north in Alaska, and it dives across the Canadian prairies into the northern part of the United States and across the Ohio Valley. And then we tap into the Gulf moisture, and so that produces wetter than normal conditions here in the Ohio Valley. but across the Southwest and Texas and the Gulf Coast and into Florida, drier and warmer than normal conditions are expected in a typical La Nina winter. How this plays out, we're still too far to be determined, but continue to watch this each and every day. We hope you've enjoyed your time here at the Weather Farm. We hope to see you again real soon.